The great Chicago poet and our neighbor and Illinois Poet Laureate Gwendolyn Brooks wrote a tribute to Paul Robeson, and it ends this way. His was the major voice, the adult voice, reminding us in music words that we are each other's business, we are each other's harvest, we are each other's magnitude and bond. When I got to Michigan State as a regional traveler for SDS, I had the great good fortune of falling in with Bert Garskoff, who was for me a mentor, an inspiration. And I learned something young that I carry on to this day, which is I'm always searching for a mentor. And it's important to have a mentor who has a vision and who has a brain, somebody who's thinking, somebody who's willing to change. It's great if he has a good smile also, which Bert always had, and he's cute like Bert. But those aren't essential. But it was essential for me to find Bert Garskoff when I found him. Somebody who was just a bit older, but had the courage of his convictions and the willingness to put it on the line for what he believed in. And so it's a tremendous honor for me to be asked by Bert to say a word here about where we are in 40 years on. So thank you, Bert, and all love to you. One thing I feel about the 60s is that it's been commodified, and it's something that gets sold back to us in kind of fragments. And nobody actually lives their lives in decades. I don't remember any of us saying on December 31st, 1969, oh shit, it's time to change. It's not that kind of a thing. And in a way, nostalgia for the 60s is like a wet blanket on the young people. It's like something that says, oh, I should have lived in the 60s when the sex was better and the music was terrific and, you know, fighting in the streets was just a way of life. None of it true, all of it fiction. And so we have to kind of recognize that then we were intergenerational people. Today we're intergenerational people. I can't think of anything more deflating than being nostalgic for a ship that's already left the shore. On the other hand, it's worth coming together 40 years later and saying, what is that spirit that we recognize that we can build on? What is that spirit that we want to connect to? That spirit of rebellion, the spirit of resistance, the spirit of insurgency and spirit. It's that spirit that we should be talking about. But just to give us a little perspective, I'm reminded of something that Zhou Enlai, the Chinese premier under Mao Zedong, Zhou Enlai was asked by a European reporter if he could comment on the impact in his thinking of the French Revolution in terms of the Chinese experience. And Zhou Enlai thought about it for quite a long time, and he said, the French Revolution? Too early to tell. And I think there's something to that, you know, that I mean, if you take the long view, empire is in decline. If you take the long view, there's a lot to look forward to. But of course, that's not exactly how we experience the here and now. So many of us have watched with absolute horror as we've been marched step by step towards an authoritarianism that was unthinkable 40 years ago. Empire resurrected and unapologetic. War without end. An undefined enemy that's supposed to be a rallying point for a new kind of energized jingoistic patriotism. Unprecedented and unapologetic military expansion. White supremacy changing its form, but essentially intact. Attacks on women and girls. Violent attacks. Growing surveillance in every sphere of our lives. On and on and on. The targeting of gay and lesbian people as a kind of a scapegoating gesture to keep our minds off what's really happening. Now that's not the whole story, but it's without a doubt a strand that runs through it. And so thinking about some of the great things about what we want to celebrate today, and in my case thinking about Bert in particular and some of the lessons that he taught. I think one is this lesson that we have to be willing to open our eyes. For most of us, the older folks in this room, I think the experience of the 60s was the first time we kind of looked up and opened our eyes and saw a world in flames and felt that we had to do something about it. Now, one of the things we had then that we have to remember is we had a view that we could change things. We believed that we could make a difference. And that gives you, no matter what you're up against, it gives you a certain amount of confidence, a certain amount of willingness to go and get your head busted, or risk your job, or risk your freedom. because you say, you know, together we really are going to change things. We have to open our eyes, see the world as it is, get a vision of what else could be, what the options are, what the alternatives are. I love the slogan from the World Social Forum, another world is possible. It's our responsibility to put some meat on those bones and to help define what that other world is. Because if another world isn't possible, as intolerable as this world seems, people put up with it. People are cynical, they're wise to it, but at the same time, how do we move if we can't change it? How do we do anything if we're stuck here? So we open our eyes, we imagine another world, we put it in moral terms. One of the things that I think we discovered about ourselves is even though we think of ourselves as political, we weren't politicians. We were people who had a moral vision of what was possible. And when we talk, for example, about healthcare or about peace, we're talking a language of ethics, not a language of instrumentalism or opportunism or what we might get. So we have to speak in a language that's large and generous and encompassing. And then we have to act. And after we act, we have to doubt. And this is something that, well, Bernadine and I always feel that this is where we lost our bearings for a while. You have to act, but you have to doubt. I speak for myself, right? That if you're certain that what you're doing is right, then you make the mistake of dogmatism and sectarianism, which we surely did at the end of the decade. So it's this idea that you act and then you doubt, but doubting can't immobilize you. You then have to act again with new wisdom, with new knowledge, and that, it seems to me, is the rhythm of what we should be kind of searching for. For me, this is a time not only of great stress and oppression and authoritarianism and a kind of rising, incipient American form of fascism. And what the government counts on, what the powerful count on, is that we will stay quiet, that we'll close our eyes. So we see the photos of Abu Ghraib, and then, well, should I make a reservation for dinner and a show? You know, a soldier is brought back from Iraq missing her face and both legs. Gee, I wonder if I should put a down payment on that car. It's the idea that we can tolerate these intolerable things without screaming, without somehow coming out, joining up and coming out and saying something. It's what they count on in terms of keeping things under control. And so we have to figure out how to break from that. I think this is a moment of unprecedented opportunity for movement building. And by that I mean, a movement is quite different than a project or an organization or a campaign, although all those things are part of it. A movement is when people can make the connections between, as we used to say in the civil rights movement, between a rotting shack and a rotting system. Between a war in Iraq and the targeting of gay and lesbian people at home. Between the rights of immigrant laborers in Chicago and in the Southwest and what happened in New Orleans. And this is something, you look at three great movements that are happening right now, but are disconnected. The anti-war movement, way too white. The New Orleans movement, way too isolated as an African-American movement. The immigrant rights movement, way too isolated as a Latino movement. How do we make the connections, find the common ground, and work together? So this, to me, is the challenge, to develop a vision and to talk to one another across movements. Now, I recognize that a movement can't be willed into being, but neither can we wait for a movement to happen. If you look at the history of the civil rights movement, there was organizing going on every year for the decades before 1954, before 1956, before 1963. When the time came, as Miles Horton used to say, you know, there's mountain times and valley times. And when the mountain times came, the organizing that had gone on for all those years counted for something. So I don't think we can wait. I think we have to begin to develop a courageous conversation across organizations, across movements, looking for that common ground and that common strand that can bring us together. Most of all, I guess what we need is, it can be summed up by rethinking about, I'm thinking about Bert, but I'm also thinking about the Wizard of Oz. And if you think about the four seekers marching down the yellow brick road, what is it they were looking for? They had to have a brain, a heart, the nerve, and a home. And And those are the four things that we need. We need a brain, a heart, a nerve, and a home. And one thing we know, which we didn't know when we were kids, is there is no wizard who can figure it out for us. We have to figure it out for ourselves. And it's up to us to build the kind of movement that can really transform and save humanity. Thank you.